I watched sparks dance across the steel wall of the rig, twisting like veins of fire that refused to die. They weren't natural. Each flash clung to the metal as if alive, crawling toward the shadows that waited just beyond the floodlights. Out here, hundreds of miles from shore, no one was coming if something went wrong. That's why we have 11 rules. Strange laws every welder on this rig is forced to obey. Rules that keep the sea from swallowing us whole. I remember the first time I broke one, the sparks didn't fade, and what stepped out of them was smiling. The first time I heard Rule 1, never let the sparks touch the floor, I laughed, thinking it was some kind of dark joke passed around to scare rookies. Sparks fall all the time when you're welding. They scatter, hiss, fade, and vanish into nothing. That's just how metal breathes under heat. But on the rig, when I saw my first arc of light slither down and hover instead of dying, I understood why the old-timers had carved that rule into our minds. It wasn't about safety regulations. It was about something else entirely. I remember Torres, the senior welder, watching me during my first shift. His voice was calm but heavy when he leaned closer and said, "Don't let them touch. If they linger, kick them out, smother them, drown them if you have to." I thought he was exaggerating, but there was no humor in his tone. Later that night, I noticed a cluster of sparks cling to the steel decking, glowing brighter instead of dimming. The air around them seemed to ripple as though the heat was bending reality itself. I froze, and Torres stomped them out with his boot before I could even react. The strange thing wasn't just that they lasted longer than normal. It was the smell, not burnt metal or ozone, like I expected, but something sharp, almost organic, like scorched flesh mixed with salt water. The scent clawed at my throat, and I had to look away. "That's the warning," Torres muttered as he rubbed his boot on the deck. "If you smell it, you're already too close." I wanted to ask what he meant, but before I could, the emergency horn blared, drowning the words, and the rest of the night passed in a blur of alarms and shouted orders. By the second week, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Every night, in the same section of the rig, sparks seemed to resist dying out. They'd hover like embers caught in slow motion, burning with a strange blue tint. The others avoided that corner, moving equipment or finding excuses not to weld there. I asked Torres about it again, and this time he sighed deeply. "The rig isn't anchored to rock," he explained, his eyes scanning the dark ocean below. "It's anchored to something else, and when sparks fall wrong, it's like knocking on its door." That idea unsettled me in a way nothing else had. I thought of the endless water below us, thousands of feet of crushing black where no light could ever reach. The thought that something might be down there, listening, made my chest tighten. I tried convincing myself it was just superstition, a way for the veterans to haze new workers. But then came the night when Martinez, one of the younger welders, didn't listen. He laughed when Torres warned him, calling us all paranoid fools, and deliberately let his torch spit sparks across the grating like fireworks. I still remember how quickly everyone else went silent. At first nothing happened, and I thought maybe Martinez was right. Then the deck beneath us shuddered, faint but noticeable, as if something massive had brushed against the rig's supports. Martinez froze, his grin fading. The sparks he'd scattered didn't fade away. They grew brighter, clustering together until they formed a pulsing line across the floor. I swear I saw them twitch, like veins under skin. Torres cursed under his breath and ordered us back, his hand already reaching for the fire extinguisher. But before he could spray, the metal below began to glow red-hot, warping under invisible heat. The sound that followed wasn't from the machinery or the sea. It was deeper, resonant, like the groan of something ancient waking up. The lights overhead flickered, and for a moment I saw shapes moving in the glow, long limbs stretching upward, shadows bending at impossible angles. Martinez dropped his torch and stumbled back, his face pale. "It's not real," he muttered to himself, but his voice cracked in terror. Torres sprayed the extinguisher, foam hissing over the deck, and the sparks finally winked out one by one. The moment they died, the shuddering stopped. No one spoke for a long time after that. The only sound was the ocean, slapping against the supports with a rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat. Martinez was written up for negligence, but there was no official mention of what really happened. In the morning briefing, the supervisor only said there had been a malfunction and reminded us of standard safety protocols. But every welder on the rig knew the truth. From then on, Martinez never so much as glanced at the floor when sparks fell. He kept his head down, his hands shaking, and I couldn't blame him. What unsettled me most was what happened 2 nights later. I was finishing my shift when I noticed a faint glow near the corner where Martinez had broken the rule. Just one spark, but it pulsed as if it had a heartbeat of its own. I crouched, holding my breath, and before I could decide what to do, I saw something move inside it, a reflection that wasn't mine, a face staring back at me with hollow eyes and a grin that stretched too wide. My boots scraped against the deck as I stumbled back, and in that instant the spark winked out as if it had been caught watching. That was when I truly understood why Rule 1, never let the sparks touch the floor, existed. The sparks weren't just fire or heat, they were openings, tiny slivers of connection to something that was waiting below. And if we ever let too many fall, if we ever ignored them long enough, that thing might climb through. Torres never explained exactly what it was, and maybe he didn't know. But as I lay in my bunk that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the ocean itself had eyes, watching us through every dying ember. I still hear that groan sometimes, carried through the steel when the waves are calm and the night is quiet. It's subtle, easy to mistake for the natural creaks of the rig, but once you've heard it, you know the difference. It's the sound of something alive and patient, biding its time, and every shift, when I strike the torch and sparks begin to fall, I hold my breath and pray they fade, like they're supposed to. Because if they don't, I know what waits beneath us is only one mistake away from answering the call. And last night, as I shut off my torch, I caught that smell again, burnt flesh and salt water, sharp and undeniable. Only this time, I wasn't welding at all. I didn't sleep much after that first week. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw that spark's reflection staring back at me, its grin carved into my memory. Torres told me not to dwell on it, but his own hollow gaze said he was just as shaken. He reminded me of Rule 2. Never step outside when the siren sounds at night, his voice low as if he was afraid the walls themselves were listening. The alarms aren't always ours, he whispered, and if you mistake them for drills, you won't come back. I thought he was exaggerating, until the night the siren wailed. The sound cut through the rig like a blade, deep and vibrating, not like the sharp mechanical horn I'd grown used to during fire drills. This was slower, mournful, almost like a call carried across miles of water. I woke up in my bunk, disoriented, my ears ringing with the resonance. Half the crew stirred too, cursing and fumbling for boots. Martinez muttered, "Another damn test," and started for the door. Torres blocked him, pressing a hand to his chest. "Stay put, that's not ours." The way he said it made my skin prickle. The siren grew louder, rising and falling with a rhythm that made the rig vibrate beneath us. It was as if the sea itself was groaning, pulling at the supports that held us above its black depths. I wanted to believe it was just malfunctioning equipment from another platform, maybe a storm-battered buoy, but then I noticed the way the others reacted. No one spoke above a whisper. No one moved toward the exits, except the rookies who hadn't learned. 2 of them pushed past Torres, scoffing. "You're all paranoid," one snapped. "It's just the storm alarm." And then the door swung shut behind them. The silence afterward was heavier than the siren. We sat in the dim bunks, the red emergency light painting our faces in blood tones. Every rise and fall of that haunting wail seemed to pull the air out of the room. "They won't come back," Torres said softly, and I couldn't tell if he was making a threat or a prediction. My heart pounded as minutes dragged on. Then came the screams, faint at first, then rising in pitch, cutting short in ways no human voice should. We pressed closer together, no one daring to breathe too loud. The door never opened again. By dawn, the siren had faded, replaced by the usual groans of machinery and the hiss of the waves. The supervisor announced that 2 workers had abandoned their posts during the night and would be listed as missing at sea. Nobody argued, nobody even raised a hand. The truth hung in the silence. We knew they hadn't jumped, and they hadn't drowned. Whatever called with that siren had taken them. As we filed out for shift, Torres leaned toward me and muttered, "That's why we never step outside when it calls. It's not meant for us. It's meant to lure them in." I tried not to imagine what them meant, but the images wouldn't leave me. Shapes in the water, mouths opening in the dark, things older than our species echoing their summons across the waves. That night, I lay awake, listening. The regular alarms blared twice during drills, sharp and unmistakable, but in the silence that followed, I thought I heard it again, faint and distant, like a whale song stretched into something mournful. I pressed my pillow over my head, but the sound wormed through the steel, into my bones. It wasn't just noise, it was invitation. The next time it came, I wasn't in my bunk. I was on shift, welding along the eastern deck. The sea was calm, stars scattered above like shattered glass. That's when the siren rolled in, low and resonant, making the torch in my hand flicker. I froze, staring at the horizon. The crew around me stopped too, tools clattering to the deck, as everyone turned their eyes downward. No one moved, no one dared. Then I heard footsteps, light, hurried, Martinez again. He was running toward the railing, muttering that he needed to just check. My stomach dropped as Torres barked, "Don't you dare." Martinez didn't stop. He reached the edge and gripped the railing, his eyes wide, reflecting the dark water below. The siren pulsed louder, the rig vibrating beneath us, and I swear I saw something moving just beneath the surface. Not waves, not shadows, but pale shapes circling, dozens of them, waiting. Martinez leaned forward, his mouth moving, as if whispering back to the sound. I shouted his name, but he didn't even flinch. Then, as if pulled by invisible strings, he climbed the rail. Torres lunged, dragging him back by the collar, and the spell seemed to break, but not before one pale hand slapped against the side of the rig, inches from his boot. The sight froze me. It was too long, too thin, fingers splayed like spider legs across the steel. The hand left behind a wet smear that glowed faintly in the dark, and then it slid back into the waves without a ripple. Martinez screamed, thrashing, until Torres pinned him down. "You want to die," he hissed, his voice shaking, "because that's what it wants." The siren wailed again, longer this time, vibrating through my chest like a second heartbeat. I could feel it trying to draw me to, calling me to step closer, just one more step into the dark. The rest of the shift blurred into silence. No one spoke, no one dared glance at the water again. When the siren finally ended, Torres released Martinez, who collapsed to the deck sobbing. "Never outside," Torres whispered to him, his hand trembling as he pushed Martinez's head down. "Never, no matter how sweet it sounds." I sat there numb, unable to shake the image of that pale hand pressing against the steel, the sound of the siren still echoing in my skull, like a voice that wouldn't stop calling my name. That night, I didn't close my eyes once, because I knew if I dreamed, I'd hear it again, closer this time. And if I answered, I wouldn't be the one waking up. By the 3rd week, I realized the rig wasn't just a machine in the middle of nowhere. It was more like a cage balanced over something alive. Torres reminded me of Rule 3. Keep all doors bolted after midnight, his face pale as he checked every latch before lights out. At first I thought it was just paranoia, a way of keeping rookies disciplined during night shifts. But then he said something that made my skin crawl. They don't always come from the sea. Sometimes they come from inside. I didn't understand what he meant until I saw it myself. That night, I was on watch duty with 2 others, pacing the dimly lit corridors while the rest of the crew slept. The rig always groaned under the waves. But past midnight, the sounds shifted. It wasn't just the steel expanding or water slapping against the supports. It was softer, closer, like footsteps echoing where no one should be walking. I froze near the mess hall door when I heard a faint rattle of a latch, as if someone was testing it from the other side. My first thought was that Martinez was wandering again, but when I peeked through the small window, there was nothing but darkness. The rattling grew stronger, the bolt straining against pressure from the other side. My partner Heller hissed, "Don't open it." His voice was low, urgent, his hand gripping the crowbar he carried like it was a lifeline. I whispered back, "Maybe it's one of ours." Heller shook his head, sweat beading his brow. "Listen," he muttered. "They never knock, they push." And when I pressed my ear to the steel, I realized he was right. It wasn't a person trying to get in. It was something pressing rhythmically, almost like breathing against the metal. We backed away slowly, but then a voice drifted through the door, muffled yet clear enough to freeze my blood. "Let me in," it whispered, in Martinez's exact tone. The problem was, I had seen Martinez asleep in his bunk not 15 minutes earlier. My chest tightened as the voice repeated, louder this time, mimicking desperation. "Please, let me in. It's cold." Heller's grip on the crowbar whitened his knuckles. "That's why we bolt them," he rasped. I wanted to argue, to rationalize it as exhaustion playing tricks on us. But then came a scraping sound, like nails dragging down the steel from the inside out. The door shuddered, metal groaning, and then it stopped as suddenly as it began. Silence hung heavy, broken only by our breathing. Heller exhaled shakily and muttered, "It's gone." But I couldn't shake the unease that lingered, the idea that whatever it was had learned our voices, our habits, and maybe even our fears. The rest of the watch passed without incident, though every door I passed seemed to hum faintly under my fingertips, as if something was pressing back from the other side, patient and waiting. When Torres relieved us at dawn, I told him what I'd heard. His face drained of color. That wasn't the first time, he admitted quietly. Years ago, before the rule was written, a rookie opened the door after midnight, thinking it was his brother calling him. We never found him. The door was wide open, the sea calm, and the only thing left behind was his boots. He paused, his eyes narrowing. What you heard wasn't Martinez, it was wearing his voice. His words haunted me the rest of the day. I found myself studying each crew member, wondering if the voices outside the doors might someday learn mine too. The next midnight came, and I made sure every bolt was locked tight before I even picked up my torch. Heller and I patrolled again, the corridors dim, with only emergency lights glowing faint red. For a while it was quiet, too quiet. Then near the storage deck, we heard it again, the slow rattle of a latch, steady and deliberate. My throat tightened as the bolt strained. "Don't look through the window," Heller warned, but curiosity clawed at me. Against my better judgment, I leaned in and glanced. What I saw made my stomach turn. It was Martinez's face staring back at me, but not quite right. His eyes were hollow, pits of shadow, and his mouth moved too wide as it whispered, "Please, it's me." The way it mimicked his voice was almost perfect, but there was an echo underneath, a second tone like something buried deep in water. I stumbled back, whispering, "That's not him." Heller pulled me away, slamming another bolt into place. The face on the other side didn't fade. It lingered, pressed against the glass, grinning wider until the lights flickered. Then it melted into shadow, leaving behind only condensation shaped like a handprint. We didn't sleep after that. Neither of us dared close our eyes, afraid the doors might open themselves if we drifted off. By dawn the condensation had vanished, but the handprint's outline was burned into my mind. Torres didn't need an explanation when he saw our pale faces. He just nodded grimly and said, "That's why the bolts aren't optional. Midnight is when they come looking." His words felt final, like a death sentence disguised as advice. That evening, I tried to convince myself it had all been exhaustion and fear, but as the sky darkened and the waves calmed, I swore I heard my own name whispered from the corridor. I gripped the bolt of my door, hands trembling, as the voice on the other side said softly, "It's you I want tonight." I barely slept after hearing my own name whispered through the bolted door. My hands still trembled when Tori's reminded me of Rule 4. Never look directly into the water after midnight. At first it sounded simple enough. Don't peer over the rails. Don't lean too far toward the ocean's black expanse. But Tori's spoke as if the rule wasn't about accidents. It was about temptation. It knows when you're curious, he said quietly. And curiosity is how it pulls you in. His words stuck with me, gnawing at my thoughts long after the sun dipped below the horizon. The sea at night was different from anything I'd known. In daylight, the waves were steel gray, restless but familiar. After midnight, though, the surface seemed too still, almost glass-like, reflecting the rig's dim lights in ways that bent and stretched. Sometimes it felt like the water wasn't reflecting at all, but watching. I tried to avoid looking, but during night shift, it was impossible not to feel its presence below, vast and patient. My stomach clenched every time I passed the railings, the temptation gnawing at me like an itch I couldn't scratch. One evening, Martinez approached me while we prepped our tools, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "You've heard it too, haven't you?" he asked, voice low. I frowned, unsure what he meant. He leaned closer. "The voices from below, they call when you get too close to the edge." His tone was frantic, desperate for me to confirm. I wanted to deny it, but the memory of my name whispered through steel silenced me. Before I could answer, Tori's barked at us to focus, but Martinez's words dug into me, burrowing deeper with each passing hour. That night, while welding along the outer deck, I felt the pull more than ever. The torch flickered, sparks dying faster than usual, and in the lull between shifts, silence pressed against my ears. Then I heard it, a faint murmur, rising from the waves below. At first it was impossible to make out, like distant chanting carried by the wind. But the longer I listened, the clearer it became. It wasn't random sound. It was words layered with something like laughter beneath. My heart raced. Against every instinct, I stepped closer to the railing. I remembered Rule 4, never look directly into the water after midnight, but my curiosity clawed at me. The surface seemed to shimmer, not with light, but with movement beneath. For a moment, I thought I saw faces, dozens of them, rising toward me, their mouths open, eyes wide with hunger. I stumbled back, but not before one face broke through the reflection. It wasn't Martinez's face this time. It was mine, staring back at me from the water, smiling in a way I never had. The sight rooted me in place, nausea twisting in my gut. "Don't look!" Tori's shout snapped me out of it. He grabbed my shoulder, dragging me away from the railing. I gasped, my chest heaving as the reflection rippled and vanished. Tori's eyes burned into mine. "That's how it starts," he growled. "It shows you what you fear, or what you want. Either way, once you meet its eyes, you'll never stop hearing the call." I tried to speak, but my voice caught. My own reflection, smiling back. It wasn't a trick of exhaustion. It felt deliberate. Later in the mess hall, I overheard whispers from the crew. Heller muttered about a worker years ago, who leaned too far over the edge after midnight, swearing he saw his mother's face in the water. The others said he climbed over without hesitation. They never found his body, just his hard hat floating near the supports. "That's why the rule exists," Heller said grimly. "Because it doesn't drag you down, you walk down yourself." The thought chilled me worse than the sparks or the siren. It didn't need force. It just needed to be seen. The temptation grew worse with each passing night. The voices called more clearly, shaping themselves into familiar tones. Tori's barking orders, my father's stern reprimands, even laughter I hadn't heard in years. Every voice begged me to look, just one glance. I kept my eyes fixed on the steel decking, but the whispers coiled around me, tugging at my resolve. One night, as I carried tools across the deck, I caught Martinez at the railing. His posture was rigid, his knuckles white on the rail. "Do you see them too?" he whispered without turning. I stopped several feet back. His voice trembled as he continued, "They're waiting for us. They're so close." My throat tightened. "Step back, Martinez," I said carefully. He didn't move. His body leaned further, as if drawn by invisible hands. I rushed forward, grabbing him by the collar and yanking him away. He fought, kicking and screaming, his eyes wild. "I saw her," he wailed. "She was there. She wanted me." It took both Torres and me to restrain him, dragging him inside while he thrashed like a drowning man. When dawn broke, Martinez sat silent in his bunk, his eyes glazed. That night changed me. It wasn't just temptation anymore. It was proof. The water wasn't just reflecting. It was showing us something else, something designed to break us. And I feared that every glance, every whisper, chipped away at my resistance. I started covering the portholes in my bunk, avoiding even the glimpse of moonlight on the waves. Still the voices followed me, whispering promises of answers, of peace, of reunion with people I'd lost. The rig groaned under the weight of its secrets, and I realized the sea was patient. It had all the time in the world to wait for me to look again. The worst part came a week later, when I woke to the sound of water dripping near my bunk. I followed the sound and froze. There on the floor was a small puddle, dark and rippling, as though stirred by unseen hands. In the water, my reflection grinned back at me, wider than before, and this time, its lips moved, whispering words I couldn't hear but felt deep in my chest. The puddle by my bunk was still rippling when Torres stormed in, his flashlight beam darting across the floor. He froze when he saw it, his face tightening with recognition. Without hesitation, he muttered, "Rule 5, never answer if someone knocks from outside after dark." I frowned, confused. There had been no knocking, only the sound of water. Torres shook his head and said, "It never starts with a knock. It builds first. When it finally does, you'll think it's someone you know. That's when you'll want to open the door. And that's when you're already lost." I didn't understand, until the first knock came 3 nights later. The shift had ended, and I was dozing in my bunk when I heard it. 3 firm thuds against the steel door. My eyes shot open. The rig was quiet, too quiet for anyone to be making rounds. I sat up, every nerve in my body burning. "Who's there?" I whispered, before catching myself. The knocks came again, slower this time, each one echoing like a heartbeat in the narrow hall. My throat went dry as Tori's warning replayed in my head. At first, I tried to ignore it, but then a voice followed. "It's me, Martinez. Open up." Relief almost washed over me, until I remembered the way Martinez had been after we pulled him from the railing. He hadn't spoken in days. His eyes had been glassy, his mind somewhere else. Why would he be outside my door at this hour? The voice sounded like him, almost perfect, but not quite. There was a strange resonance in the tone, like the sea itself was speaking through him. My hand hovered over the handle, trembling. The voice pressed harder. "Please, I need help. Something's wrong." My chest tightened. It sounded desperate, real. Every instinct screamed to help, to open the door and pull him in. But another memory surfaced. The grin in the puddle, the way my reflection whispered without sound. I forced myself back, pressing against the wall, whispering to no one, "I can't, I won't." The voice outside paused, then it whispered my name, perfectly softly, in a way that made my heart ache. That was when I realized it knew too much. The knocking stopped, but I didn't move for the rest of the night. When dawn broke, Torres confronted me. "It came, didn't it?" he asked, studying my face. I nodded. He sighed. "Good, you didn't answer. That's all that matters." But know this, it won't give up after one night. The sea learns. It changes. Next time, it won't sound like Martinez. It'll sound like someone you can't refuse. His warning planted a seed of dread, deeper than I cared to admit. Who else could it mimic? The next encounter came faster than I expected. This time, the knocking was softer, almost polite. I clenched my fists and stayed silent, heart hammering. Then the voice spoke, and it wasn't Martinez. It was my mother. Her tone was gentle, the same cadence I remembered from childhood, when she'd call me inside from playing in the yard. "It's cold out here," she whispered. "Please let me in." My breath caught. She had been gone for years, buried far from any ocean. Yet here she was, speaking through the steel. Tears burned my eyes as I covered my ears, whispering, "You're not real. You're not her." The voice responded immediately, sharper now. "Don't ignore me. I raised you. I know you. Don't you dare shut me out." The words twisted into something venomous, a mockery of love turned cruel. I curled into myself, rocking in the darkness, waiting for it to stop. When it finally did, I was left shaking, drenched in sweat. That was the moment I realized the sea didn't just tempt. It punished resistance with cruelty. Others weren't as strong. 2 days later, we found one of the engineers, Heller, missing. His bunk was empty, the door ajar. No signs of a struggle, no alarms triggered. Torres's face darkened when he saw. He answered. He muttered. We scoured the rig, but Heller was gone. The only thing left was his boots, neatly placed by the outer railing. No one said it aloud, but we all knew, whatever knocked, whatever whispered, it had taken him the moment he opened that door. The nights grew unbearable after that. Every evening, the knocking returned, always around the same time, always growing more convincing. Sometimes it was Torres's voice, gruff and commanding, telling me there was an emergency. Other times it was laughter from old friends, long dead, voices that tugged at parts of me I thought I'd buried. Each time I clenched my jaw and stayed silent, even as my body screamed to respond. But silence wasn't easy. The longer I ignored it, the louder it became, until the entire bunk seemed to vibrate with the sound. One night, I made the mistake of speaking back. "Leave me alone," I shouted at the door. The knocking stopped immediately, and for a moment I felt victorious. Then slowly, the handle began to turn. My blood turned to ice as the metal squealed. I lunged forward, slamming the bolt tighter, pressing my weight against the door. On the other side, the voice whispered, calm and steady, "You already answered. That's enough." I stayed there until dawn, shaking, certain that if the bolt failed, I would vanish like Heller. The following morning, Torres found me pale and sleepless. I told him what happened, and his jaw tightened. "It's getting smarter," he said. "Next time, it won't just knock. It'll wait until you forget, until your guard slips." His eyes were haunted, as though he'd fought this battle longer than he admitted. Then he said something that chilled me to the bone. "If it ever stops knocking altogether, that's when you should be truly afraid, because that means it's already inside." That night, when the hour came, I braced myself. The knocks echoed, familiar now, almost routine, but then halfway through, they stopped. I froze, listening to the silence, pressing against the door. For a moment, I thought maybe it had given up. Relief trickled through me, until I heard it, slow, wet footsteps moving down the hall, away from my room. I held my breath, praying it would keep walking. But a thought gnawed at me, cold and cruel. If it could walk away, it could come back. Or worse, it could go after someone else. When the footsteps faded, I thought I had made it through the night. But the silence that followed clung like suffocating fog. The hum of the rig's generators, usually constant, had died down to a faint vibration. Even the usual crash of waves against the supports had gone still. That's when I remembered Rule 6. Never step onto the deck when the sea is silent. Torres had said silence out here was never a blessing. It was a sign, a warning that the water itself was holding its breath, waiting for something we weren't supposed to see. I tested the air, straining my ears for any sound, but there was nothing, just the pounding of my own heart. Against better judgment, I crept to the porthole and peeked out. The ocean stretched like glass, utterly flat, not a single ripple disturbing the black surface. The floodlights cast pale cones over the railings, but beyond that, there was nothing but endless stillness. My skin prickled as if unseen eyes were staring back from the water. I pulled the curtain shut, swearing under my breath, "Not tonight, I'm not going out there." The silence didn't break until dawn, and when it did, it came like a roar. The waves crashed back with sudden fury, slamming against the rig as though reclaiming what had been stolen. Men stumbled from their bunks, shouting over the noise. Torres pulled me aside, his face grim. "You felt it too, didn't you?" "The stillness." I nodded, and he spat to the floor. "Good. You stayed inside. Others weren't so careful before you joined. That's why we don't talk about Jensen anymore." I didn't ask who Jensen was. I was too afraid of the answer. But I learned soon enough. 2 nights later, the silence returned. This time it came earlier, swallowing the rig just as the sun dipped beneath the horizon. The crew exchanged nervous glances. Nobody wanted to admit it out loud, but we all felt the same thing, that unnatural pause in the world. I tried to sleep, but unease gnawed at me until I gave in and went wandering the halls. That's when I saw the door to the main deck hanging open, swaying slightly. My stomach sank. Someone had broken the rule. I crept closer, the dim emergency lights flickering above me. The open door framed only blackness, like a mouth waiting to swallow me whole. Beyond it, the deck gleamed faintly under the moonlight, every surface wet and shining. I spotted a figure standing at the railing, motionless, staring down into the still sea. It was Martinez. His posture was rigid, his shoulders rising and falling as though fighting for breath. "Martinez," it is said, but he didn't react. I felt torn. Do I risk stepping out to drag him in, or do I stay safe and watch him vanish? Before I could decide, Martinez slowly turned his head. His eyes caught the moonlight, pale and glassy, reflecting nothing human. His lips moved, but no sound came out, as though the silence swallowed his words. Then, without warning, he climbed the railing and dropped into the still water. The splash I expected never came. He simply disappeared, the ocean swallowing him like it had been waiting. My legs locked in terror, and I staggered back, slamming the door shut. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't stop replaying the sight of his eyes. The next morning, Torres cornered me. "You saw him, didn't you?" His tone wasn't surprised. It was resigned. That's how it always happens. The silence calls someone, and they go. You can't save them, no matter what. The sea doesn't like being interrupted. His words sank into me like a curse. I wanted to protest, to demand why we couldn't fight back, but I bit my tongue. Part of me already knew the truth. We weren't surviving against the sea. We were obeying it, begging for scraps of mercy. That night, the silence came again. This time I stayed in my bunk, gripping the sheets, refusing to move, but the quiet pressed harder, filling my head with pressure, like being dragged underwater. My ears popped, my skull ached, and then I heard it, whispers, faint and distant, coming not from the hall but from the water itself. They sounded like Martinez, like Heller, like voices that should have been gone. "Come outside," they said, echoing in my mind. "It's beautiful out here." I stuffed my ears with cloth, shaking, refusing to listen. The whispers grew louder, until the walls themselves seemed to vibrate. I wanted to scream, to beg them to stop, but I held on. And then just as suddenly, the silence broke. The sea roared back to life, waves crashing against the rig so violently, the metal shuddered. I collapsed in relief, but I knew it wasn't over. Every time the silence came, it would take someone. If it couldn't take me directly, it would find another. And that realization terrified me more than anything else, that my survival came at someone else's cost. The crew grew thinner with each passing silence. Martinez was gone, then O'Malley, then Reyes, always the same. Someone lured outside, their body claimed by the still sea. The rig felt emptier, haunted by their absence. I started marking the calendar, counting the nights of silence, realizing a pattern. Every 7 days, without fail, the sea went still. It wasn't random, it was ritual. The thought chilled me, because if it was ritual, then something was demanding it, and whatever it was patient, waiting, always hungry. On the 7th silence since I had joined the crew, I made a mistake. The air grew still, the waves stopped, and I panicked. I bolted from my bunk, racing down the hall to find Torres, needing his steady voice to anchor me. But when I rounded the corner, I saw him. He was already standing by the door to the deck, one hand resting on the handle, his face pale and drenched in sweat. "Don't," I whispered, my voice cracking. He turned, his eyes wide with something like defeat. "I can't hold it back anymore," he said, and pushed the door open. The silence poured in like liquid, wrapping around me, pressing against my lungs. Torres stepped out, his figure swallowed by the still air. I tried to move, to scream, but my body refused. Then he looked back at me one last time, and in that glance, I saw it, the acceptance, the surrender. He didn't fight, he just let the sea take him. I stumbled back, slamming the door shut, my body shaking violently. For the first time, I realized I might be the last one left, if this continued, and the silence would never stop calling. That night, I stayed awake, clutching a wrench like it could protect me. I prayed the sea would roar back, that the silence would end. Hours passed, and the stillness remained. My mind spiraled, imagining Torres's pale eyes staring at me from beneath the water, Martinez's whisper curling against my ear. Then in the dead of night, I heard something worse than silence, a sound from inside my cabin. The floorboards creaked softly, as if someone was already standing there in the dark, waiting for me to notice. The creak of the floorboards near my bunk made my blood freeze. I knew no one else should have been inside my cabin, but I didn't dare move. I remembered Torres's warning before he vanished. He had whispered about Rule 7. If you see a shadow move without a source, never acknowledge. My heart hammered as I forced myself to stay perfectly still, staring at the wall while the sensation of someone's presence pressed heavy against the room. I didn't look, because some part of me knew if I did, I wouldn't like what I saw. I tried to breathe slow, shallow breaths, listening for any sound that would confirm I wasn't imagining it. The silence outside was unbearable, but inside it was worse. From the corner of my vision, where moonlight slanted through the porthole, I saw movement. A dark smudge stretched across the floor, long and crooked, bending unnaturally against the angle of the light. My instinct screamed to turn my head, but I clenched my jaw and whispered to myself, "Don't look, don't you dare." The shadow stretched farther, as if testing my restraint. Minutes passed like hours. The shadow shifted, curling around the legs of the bunk, then retreating, then creeping forward again. It felt alive, patient, deliberate. Sweat slid down my back as I shut my eyes tight, praying it would vanish if I refused to acknowledge it. But then a new horror began, the sound of breathing, low and uneven, like someone crouched inches from my face. My throat tightened, and I bit my tongue to stop myself from reacting. If I flinched, if I spoke, if I even twitched toward it, I knew I'd be lost. Suddenly, the air turned frigid. My skin prickled with gooseflesh, and I felt a sharp tug at the corner of my blanket. The shadow wanted me to move. I gripped the fabric harder, every muscle trembling, but I refused to open my eyes. Then in the darkness, a voice whispered, low, raspy, and almost childlike, "I know you see me." My pulse spiked, but I said nothing, forcing the air through my teeth in shallow bursts. The shadow hissed, sliding away, and the weight of the room lifted. By the time I opened my eyes, it was gone. The next morning, I staggered into the mess hall, pale and exhausted. Only a handful of us remained, and their faces mirrored mine, drawn, sleepless, haunted. I finally asked the question hanging heavy between us. "How many shadows have you seen?" Reyes flinched, his spoon clattering against the tray. "You never ask that," he muttered. "Asking means you've acknowledged them. That's how they spread." His words settled like a stone in my chest. I hadn't asked out of curiosity. I had asked out of desperation, and that meant the shadow wasn't finished with me. That night, I made the mistake of pacing my cabin. My nerves were frayed, and I needed to move. I stopped by the porthole, staring into the endless black sea. That's when I caught it, the reflection of something behind me. My heart lurched. A tall figure, longer than a man should be, was draped across the wall. My breath hitched, and I spun before I could stop myself. But when I turned, there was nothing. Just my empty cabin, my chest hollowed out with dread. I had broken the rule. The following hours blurred in a haze of terror. The shadow didn't wait until night anymore. It followed me down the halls, skittering just at the edge of my vision. I saw it flicker across the ceiling during meals, stretching impossibly thin in the floodlights on the deck. Reyes avoided me entirely, whispering to the others that I was marked. The truth was worse. I could feel it growing bolder, waiting for me to acknowledge it again, waiting for me to give it permission to step fully into the world. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the shadow looming closer, its long arms reaching for me. Once I woke to find it standing over my bunk, its head brushing the ceiling. I shut my eyes immediately, heart galloping, forcing myself not to scream. Its breath was cold against my face, icy and damp, like the spray of the sea. Minutes dragged on, maybe hours, until the air shifted, and I was alone again. But I knew it wasn't gone. It was only playing with me. On the 7th night since I had first seen it, the shadow finally spoke again. I was lying in bed, paralyzed with fear, when it whispered from the corner of the room. "You looked once. That's all I needed. Look again, and I'll stay." My blood turned to ice. The voice was wrong, broken, like dozens of whispers layered together. I pulled the blanket over my head, teeth chattering. The silence stretched on, unbearable, until the mattress dipped as though something had climbed onto it beside me. The weight pressed closer, and the voice brushed my ear. One glance. That's all. I thought I would break, scream, throw myself from the bunk. But instead, I whispered into the dark. "No." My voice cracked, weak, but it was enough. The mattress lifted, the pressure vanished, and the room fell silent once more. I didn't sleep, but I survived. When dawn came, I found new bruises on my arms, long finger-shaped marks that hadn't been there before. The shadow hadn't needed my eyes. It had already touched me. The crew dwindled further. One by one, the men who admitted seeing shadows disappeared. Some walked off the deck into the sea. Others were found staring blankly in their cabins, lips moving soundlessly, eyes glazed over. No one dared to touch them after that. The shadow didn't just haunt individuals. It claimed them, body and soul. I began to wonder if that would be my fate too, if I had doomed myself the night I turned toward it. The thought gnawed at me with every flicker of movement on the walls, and then came the worst night of all. I was dozing when the shadow appeared again, taller than ever, filling the room. But this time, it wasn't silent. It spoke in Torres's voice, clear and steady, as if he were standing beside me. "It's not too late. Just look at me, acknowledge me, and you'll understand." My chest ached, torn between grief and terror. For a split second, I almost believed it was him, returned from the sea to comfort me. My eyes began to open before I forced them shut again, whispering, "You're not him. You'll never be him." The shadow didn't vanish this time. It stayed, lingering at the edge of my vision, swaying like a figure suspended by invisible strings. I lay frozen until the sound of metal groaning outside filled the air, as though the rig itself was bending under some massive weight. The shadow leaned closer, stretching across the ceiling, and in that moment I realized something horrifying. It wasn't bound to the silence, or to the knocks, or even to the sea. It was already inside, and I had no idea how to stop it. The first time it happened, I thought I was dreaming, lying in my bunk, half asleep. I heard it, my name, whispered faintly through the metal walls. It wasn't like a crewmate calling. It was stretched thin, watery, echoing from somewhere far below. I remembered Rule 8, never answer if the sea calls your name. It sounded ridiculous when I first read it, but now the voice was real, tugging at me, begging me to respond. My lips almost parted before I bit down hard, choking the word back. I pressed the pillow over my ears, but it didn't stop. Daniel. The sound came again, low and drawn out, as though the ocean itself had learned how to speak. My skin prickled. I whispered to myself, "Don't answer, don't answer." The voice grew sharper, impatient, slithering into the cracks of my mind. It knew I had heard it, and it wasn't going to let me rest. The next morning, I stumbled into the mess hall, hollow-eyed and shaking. Reyes caught sight of me and muttered, "It called you, didn't it?" His tone wasn't surprised, just resigned. I nodded stiffly, unable to form words. Reyes leaned closer and hissed, "Never acknowledge it. It's not your voice. It never was." Then he shoved his tray away and left, leaving me colder than before. If it wasn't my voice, whose was it imitating? Later that day, while I worked near the starboard railing, the sea was eerily calm. The sky stretched gray and endless, the waves gentle as glass. Then I heard it again, this time not faint, but loud, clear, rising from the black water. "Daniel." My whole body locked up. I knew no one else heard it. The others kept moving, unaware. I gripped the railing until my knuckles burned, staring down at the shifting surface. For a terrifying second, I swore I saw a face beneath the waves. My own face, eyes open, mouth moving. That night, I couldn't resist anymore. When the voice came again, dragging itself through the walls, I whispered back without thinking, "What do you want?" Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. I almost convinced myself it had been a mistake, that nothing would happen. Then came the reply, not in the sea's voice, but in my mother's. "Come home." My chest tightened. My mother had been dead for years. Sleep abandoned me after that. Every time the voice came, it used someone new, Torres, Reyes, even my younger self. Always familiar, always intimate, always dragging me closer to the edge. I stopped speaking to the others, afraid they'd hear me mutter back. But resisting felt impossible. The more I ignored it, the louder it became. Once it roared so violently through the rig that my bunk shook, and I swore the walls rattled with my name. The crew thinned again. Men began vanishing at night. No screams, no struggle, just gone. One morning, we found a set of boots at the edge of the deck. Soles still damp, as though someone had stepped neatly out of them before walking into the sea. Reyes refused to touch them. "That's what happens when you answer," he said grimly. "The sea doesn't take you, you give yourself to it." By the fifth night, the voice had changed tactics. It no longer begged. It mocked. "You're already mine," it crooned. "Why fight it?" I buried my head under the blanket, rocking back and forth, but the sound seeped through every barrier. Then, for the first time, I heard more than one voice. Dozens of whispers overlapped, all chanting my name, all dragging me toward the porthole. My hands shook as I locked it shut, praying the glass would hold. One evening, Reyes caught me staring at the water too long. He grabbed my collar and snarled, "Don't you dare." That's how it starts. You look, you listen, then you lean over, and next thing, you're gone. I shoved him back, anger flaring, but deep down, he was right. The sea wasn't just calling, it was waiting for me to give in. And I was close, too close. The following dawn, I woke to find salt water pooled on my floor. My boots were soaked, though I didn't remember leaving my bunk. My heart sank when I noticed wet footprints leading from the door back to the bed. My own size, my own tread. It was as if I had already answered and followed, but with no memory of doing it. The sea didn't just want me to hear, it wanted me to obey in my sleep. I grew desperate. I stuffed rags in my ears, blasted the generator's hum through the walls, anything to drown it out. But the sea grew smarter. Soon I stopped hearing it with my ears. Instead, the voice rose inside my skull, vibrating through bone, resonating in my chest. "Daniel," it whispered, endlessly patient. "You've already said yes." No matter what I did, it was always there, echoing under my thoughts. On the seventh night, I snapped. I staggered out onto the deck, barefoot, teeth chattering in the icy wind. The ocean stretched vast and silent, black as oil under the moon. Then softly, lovingly, it called again. "Daniel." I trembled, fighting to stay still, but my body leaned forward against my will. My reflection shimmered in the waves, smiling faintly, lips forming the word, "Come." I nearly stepped over the railing before Reyes tackled me back. "You idiot," he hissed, shaking me. "You answered." I wanted to argue, to deny it, but I couldn't. My throat still buzzed with the memory of the word I had spoken. "What happens now?" I whispered. Reyes's face was pale. "Now it won't stop until you're gone." His words carved themselves into me like a curse. From that moment, I knew my days were numbered. The sea didn't call softly anymore. It screamed. My name rattled through the rig like thunder, vibrating in the pipes, groaning in the metal beams. Every time I closed my eyes, I dreamed of sinking, arms open, lungs burning, until the black swallowed me whole. When I woke, my sheets were damp with seawater. I had begun to lose the line between dream and reality. The sea wasn't waiting for me to answer. It was dragging me toward a choice I couldn't escape. The last thing Reyes told me before he vanished was chilling. "If you hear it close enough to touch you, it's already too late." I didn't understand what he meant until tonight. The voice didn't echo from the waves, or the walls, or even my skull. It came from right behind me, warm breath grazing the back of my neck as it spoke my name, clear, deliberate, in my own voice. I froze, too afraid to turn, too afraid to breathe. And then I felt it, something wet and cold, like fingers made of salt water, brushing across my shoulder. The night the storm rolled in, the entire rig felt like it was being torn apart. The sky cracked with lightning that flashed brighter than welding arcs, and thunder rattled the steel bones beneath our feet. I remembered Rule 9, never let the lights go out during a storm. At first it sounded like simple safety advice, but as the wind howled and the waves climbed higher, I realized the rule had nothing to do with visibility, and everything to do with keeping something in the dark from finding us. Rain hammered the deck so hard it sounded like fists pounding on the walls. I stood near the generator room, staring at the trembling bulbs overhead. Every flicker made my chest tighten. Every stutter of light, a reminder of how fragile the barrier was between us and the storm. Reyes was gone now. Torres had vanished days ago, and the remaining crew walked around hollow-eyed, whispering prayers under their breath. The lights weren't just illumination anymore. They were our only defense. By midnight, the storm reached a fever pitch. Water sprayed over the deck, flooding drains, coating every inch of metal in slick black seawater. Then I saw it, a surge that nearly swallowed the platform whole, rising higher than I thought possible. In that flash of lightning, I swore I saw something riding the wave. Not debris, not foam, but a shadow with limbs too long, clinging to the water like it was alive. The lights flickered just then, and for a second, the rig fell into darkness. My blood turned to ice. I sprinted toward the backup generator, heart slamming against my ribs. Behind me, I heard something thud onto the deck. Heavy, wet, deliberate. I didn't dare look back. My boots splashed through the pooling water as I yanked open the generator hatch. Inside, the hum was dying, the engine sputtering like a man gasping for air. I screamed at myself to move faster, fumbling with the controls, and when the bulbs flared back to life, I caught a glimpse of a dark, towering shape retreating over the rail. The other men gathered in the mess hall, drenched and terrified. One of them, a mechanic named Harris, muttered, "I saw it too." In the dark, it was waiting. No one answered him. We all knew the rule, and we all knew what it meant now. The storm wasn't just weather, it was a door, and darkness was the crack that let something climb through. The thought made my hands shake so badly, I nearly dropped my coffee. As the storm raged on, the rig groaned under its own weight. I sat awake, watching the bulbs swing overhead, too afraid to blink. At 3 in the morning, the lights dimmed again. This time, instead of rushing to the generator, I froze, because in the fraction of a second, where the world went black, I felt something brush past me. It wasn't wind, and it wasn't water. It was solid, cold, and carried the scent of rotting seaweed. When the lights flared again, the mess hall chairs were all turned to face me, though no one else had been inside. Panic clawed at me. I dragged Harris to the generator room, demanding he help me secure the system. He shook his head, voice trembling. "The lights aren't powered by fuel, they're powered by staying awake." That's what Torres used to say. That's why we all sit in shifts, staring at them, willing them to stay on. His words sent a chill deeper than the storm ever could. I realized the rule wasn't about machines at all. It was about attention, about not letting the dark believe it had been given permission to enter. The wind howled louder, so strong it nearly ripped doors from their hinges. At one point, I stepped outside and saw the waves glowing faintly, lit from beneath as though something vast and bioluminescent was circling the rig. Every swell of the sea revealed pale limbs brushing just under the surface, stretching longer than the cranes above me. The lights flickered again, and I screamed, forcing myself to stare at the bulbs until my eyes burned. "Stay awake, stay awake," I muttered, like a prayer. Hours passed, each one slower than the last. The storm didn't break, but my mind did. Every time I closed my eyes, even for a second, I dreamed of the rig already collapsed, sinking into the black. In those dreams, the lights were gone, and something huge loomed just above us, blotting out every star. I woke with a start, realizing my hand had slipped from the switch, and the bulb above me dimmed to a dying orange glow. Harris shook me violently back to focus. "Don't fall asleep, man. Don't you understand? If the lights go out, it's not the storm that kills us." By dawn, exhaustion had hollowed me out. The storm hadn't ended. It only seemed to grow heavier. The ocean was endless white spray, and the sky churned with bruised purple clouds. The lights still burned overhead, though faintly, as if straining against some invisible force. Then, without warning, one of the bulbs burst. The mess hall plunged into shadow, and from the corner of the room, I saw something rise. A figure of dripping black water, taller than the ceiling, bending unnaturally to step toward me. The lights buzzed faintly, struggling to return. For a second, I was sure they would fail completely, leaving me alone with the thing crawling closer. I staggered backward, tripping over a chair, eyes locked on its shifting outline. Just as its hand reached toward me, the emergency bulb flickered to life, and the creature melted back into the storm, leaving only a trail of seawater across the floor. But as I stared at that wet trail, stretching all the way to my bunk, a realization froze my breath. The storm hadn't ended, and neither had the night. The lights were the only thing keeping the horizon from swallowing us whole, and they were already growing dim again. The morning after the storm, the ocean stilled into a strange silence. The sea looked like polished glass, yet the horizon was shrouded in a wall of fog so thick it seemed alive. I remembered Rule 10, never follow anyone who walks into the fog. When I first read it, I thought it was just about getting lost. But now, staring at that endless gray curtain, I understood it was something else. The fog wasn't drifting. It was waiting, pulsing faintly, as though it had a heartbeat. I was on deck with Harris when it happened. A figure appeared at the far end, moving slowly toward the rail. At first I thought it was one of the missing men. Torres, maybe Reyes. But the way it moved was wrong. Its steps were uneven, like it was being dragged by invisible strings. Harris grabbed my arm and whispered, "Don't, just don't." I wanted to believe him, but the figure turned its head, and for a heartbeat, I swore it was my own face staring back at me. The figure slipped over the railing and vanished into the fog without making a sound. No splash, no ripple, nothing, just gone. Harris muttered, "That's how it gets you. Not by force, by trust." His voice cracked when he added, "Torres followed 2 nights ago, said he saw his brother in there. We never saw him again." My stomach churned as I tried to process that. The fog wasn't just hiding people, it was using them. That night the fog crept closer, curling over the deck like fingers sliding through the railings. I stayed awake, watching, listening to the distant groans of the rig. Then I heard footsteps echoing down the hall outside my bunk. Slow, steady, deliberate. "Daniel," a voice called, warm and familiar. My heart nearly stopped. It was Reyes, but Reyes had been gone for days. Against every instinct, I cracked the door open. The corridor was empty, except for the trail of wet footprints leading toward the deck and the fog waiting beyond. I slammed the door shut and pressed my back against it, shaking. The voice came again, muffled through the steel. "Come on, Daniel, just one step. It's safe." The words made bile rise in my throat. It sounded like Reyes, but hollow, stretched, as if the fog was wearing his voice like a mask. I stuffed my ears and rocked back and forth until dawn broke. When I finally opened the door, the footprints had evaporated, leaving only the faint smell of salt behind. The next day, Harris and I patrolled the deck, keeping distance from the fog. He admitted something I didn't want to hear. "I followed once, just a little. The fog, it doesn't feel like air in there. It feels like water. Thick, heavy, pressing into your skin." I heard voices swimming through it, voices that knew me. If I hadn't turned back, I don't think I'd be here now. His eyes were wide, haunted, and I realized he wasn't warning me. He was confessing. That evening, the fog thickened until it was all I could see past the rail. The sea had vanished, the horizon erased. I felt like we were floating in nothingness, suspended in a gray void. Then I saw them, 3 figures standing in the fog, shapes barely outlined in the haze. They didn't move, they didn't speak, they just waited, silhouettes etched in smoke. Every instinct screamed at me to look away, but my eyes refused to obey. Slowly, one of the figures lifted its hand and beckoned. I turned to Harris, panicked, but he was gone. My chest tightened as I scanned the deck. Then I saw him, halfway to the railing, walking straight toward the waiting silhouettes. "Harris," I shouted, but he didn't stop. His movements were smooth, calm, almost peaceful, like he was sleepwalking. I sprinted after him, my boots slamming against the wet metal, but the closer I got, the heavier the air became. It was like the fog was already pulling me in. I grabbed his arm just before he reached the edge. His skin was ice cold, his eyes unfocused. "It's my daughter," he whispered. "She's waiting for me." My stomach lurched. Harris had told me his daughter drowned years ago. The fog was using her to lure him in. "That's not her," I shouted, shaking him violently. He blinked, confused, as if waking from a dream. Then behind him, the fog rippled, and one of the figures stepped closer, stretching unnaturally tall, its limbs bending like smoke. We stumbled back, and the fog seemed to grow restless, churning as if dozens of shapes writhed just beyond the veil. The whispers started then, thousands of overlapping voices, each one calling a name, some in joy, some in desperation. They clawed at my thoughts, each one begging me to step forward, to believe, to follow. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The voices weren't in the air, they were inside my head. I dragged Harris back into the rig, locking the door behind us. He collapsed against the wall, gasping. "I almost went," he muttered, shaking violently. I saw her face. I felt her hand. His eyes filled with tears, and I realized he hadn't truly come back. A part of him was still out there, lost in the fog, and I couldn't shake the fear that next time, he wouldn't resist. That night, the fog crept through the ventilation shafts. I woke to find my bunk, swathed in pale mist, thin fingers of gray curling over my blanket. My throat tightened as the whispers filled the room again. This time, it wasn't Ray's or Harris or my mother. It was my own voice calling from the fog. "Daniel, you know it's the only way." I stumbled out of bed, trembling, heart hammering in my chest. The mist was thicker now, slithering across the floor, hiding my boots, my legs. I backed into the corner, fists clenched, whispering to myself, "Don't follow." The fog quivered as though it understood my defiance, then pulled back, retreating through the cracks in the walls. But not before one final whisper echoed in my skull. "Next time, you won't resist." When dawn came, the fog was still there, circling the rig like a living wall. Harris was gone. His bunk was empty, sheets soaked with salt water. The only thing left was a faint trail of wet footprints leading straight into the mist outside. And then I realized something worse. The trail didn't stop at the railing. It led straight into my cabin. The first time I heard it, I thought it was just the sea battering the supports, a low, hollow thud that traveled through the steel bones of the oil rig and into my bunk. But then it came again, measured and deliberate, like knuckles striking a door from somewhere deep beneath us. I remembered Rule 11. If you hear knocking from below the rig, never knock back. It had seemed absurd when I first read it, but now the sound was sharp, intentional, almost curious, like something beneath the waves was asking to be let in. That night, I lay awake, counting each strike. 3 knocks, silence, then 3 again, always in perfect rhythm. My chest grew tight as the sound climbed through the pipes, rattling like a message I wasn't meant to understand. I whispered into the dark, "It knows we're here." The walls answered with another series of knocks, harder this time, as if agreeing. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the vibration thrummed through my skull. By morning, the others were restless. Harris was gone now, taken by the fog, leaving me alone with 2 men I barely trusted. One of them, a quiet electrician named McCarthy, asked, "Did you hear it? The knocking?" I tried to play dumb, but his pale face gave me away. "It's been happening for days," he muttered. At first I thought it was storms echoing, but last night it tapped out my name. His words made my stomach drop. If it could mimic voices, maybe it could mimic signals too. The storm season wasn't over. The sky turned black by afternoon, lightning tearing jagged lines across the clouds. The knocking returned in bursts, louder now, traveling up through the metal flooring into our boots. McCarthy flinched at each strike. "It's talking," he whispered, sweat dripping down his temple. The other man, Cole, scowled. "Talking? It's just the ocean smashing us apart." His bravado cracked when the knocking shifted. 3 sharp raps followed by 2 slow ones, repeating like a code. That evening, the rig shook violently, groaning as waves slammed the supports. I sat in the mess hall staring at the floor, waiting for the inevitable. Sure enough, the knocks came, deep and resonant, rolling up through the steel. This time, they didn't stop. They hammered over and over, faster, louder, shaking cups off tables. Cole jumped up, slamming his fists against the wall, shouting, "What the hell do you want?" My blood froze. He had answered. The rig went silent, eerily still. For a moment I thought maybe it had stopped. Then came the reply, from beneath us. A single knock, so powerful it rattled every beam, and sent dust cascading from the vents. Cole stumbled back, pale, muttering, "It heard me." McCarthy grabbed him by the collar and hissed, "You idiot, you don't knock back. You never knock back." But it was too late. Something beneath us now knew we were listening. That night, Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I dreamed of the rig sinking, its legs dragging us down into a cavern where pale hands reached upward from the dark, endless floor. At one point, I swore I heard breathing beneath the metal grates, slow and wet, like lungs the size of the ocean. I pressed my ear to the floor despite myself, and my heart stuttered when a knock came directly from beneath my skull. Slow, patient, waiting for my reply. Cole broke before dawn. Driven mad by the constant pounding, he marched to the edge of the deck and hammered his boot heel against the steel rail, shouting into the storm, "I'm right here. You hear me? Come get me." I screamed at him to stop, but his voice carried into the night, reckless and desperate. The rig answered with a quake, so violent, it nearly threw us off our feet. From the black water below, bubbles erupted, massive and boiling, as if something vast had stirred awake. We didn't see Cole again after that. One second he was at the railing, and the next he was gone. No splash, no scream, just gone, swallowed in silence. McCarthy collapsed to his knees, whispering prayers, his eyes wild. "It took him," he said. "It's going to take us too. It knows we're here now." I couldn't argue. The knocks grew louder, closer, no longer below us but inside the walls, traveling up the stairwells like something climbing toward us. I tried barricading myself in my cabin, shoving furniture against the door. McCarthy did the same, but the knocking didn't care about walls. It echoed inside the pipes, thumped beneath the beds, rattled through the frames. It never stopped. Sometimes it was soft, teasing, other times violent enough to bend the metal. Worst of all were the moments it mimicked human rhythm, tapping out what sounded like laughter, or even speech. One night, it tapped 11 times, then paused, then 11 again, over and over, like it was counting down. On the final night, the power died completely. No lights, no hum of the generator, only darkness, wind and the relentless knocking. McCarthy broke first, hammering his fists against the floor, screaming for it to stop. The moment his skin struck metal, the knocks answered in perfect sync, mirroring his rhythm exactly. His screams cut off as the floor buckled beneath him, and with a single deafening crash, he was gone, dragged through the steel, as if it had liquefied. Only the echo of his fists remained. Now I'm alone. The rig groans in the black, tilting slightly with each wave. The fog presses close. The storm never ends, and the knocking hasn't stopped. It follows me no matter where I go, sometimes above me, sometimes below, always patient, always waiting. I haven't answered, not yet, but my resolve weakens with every hour. My hands twitch when it comes, my knuckles ache to reply. I know what happens if I do, but here's the part that terrifies me most. Tonight the knocking didn't come from the floor. It came from the inside of my cabin door. 3 slow knocks, then silence. And when I leaned closer, holding my breath, I heard my own voice whisper through the steel, "Daniel, let me in." If you enjoyed this story, like, share, and subscribe for more.